sorry it's going so late. We promise to be extremely efficient, right, Jim?
Yep.
Whoa.
Let me go to
Okay, set this up here. I'll talk while Jake sets this up. Sort of switch. Switch. This project actually was done extremely quickly. So that's a kind of departure from the two public projects. What's fascinating is that the area that all three projects is in is literally in 15 minutes walking distance. So many of you who know New York have probably actually walked within a circle of these projects. It's a rather interesting coincidence that the jury came up with for this evening a group of projects that, some of the best things in New York City, you can walk to from one thing to the other, but they actually came up with a group of projects that you could peramble to. Both our firms we got, but it was addressed to both of our firms, can't remember how it worked, a really beautiful looking RFP package on our desk from Weisz and Company, the clients, and thought, oh, this is so well designed. I've never seen such a beautiful RFP. And for anyone who know this client, they know they're the marketing arm for New York City. They have a graphic design department internal to them. So you would only expect that from them. So we open it up, and I'm thinking, oh, this is like an architecture RFP. They wanted us to do an interiors for their space. And in fact, I'm going to ignore the fact that this is making funny noises. But in fact, we opened the RFP, and I called Jake immediately, and I said, did you read this thing? And it was an RFP, and it went out to apparently 12 firms. We know some of them, and some of them were extremely famous and much larger than both of our respective firms. But it was an RFP to come up with a completely new idea about how an information center should even work in New York City. And you had to not only provide the soft, the fee, professional services, but you actually had to build it. So they wanted a proposal and a budget to literally do it. And so I called Jake up and I said, well, are they serious? Should we just ignore that? And so what we did is we sent back a response, which included an idea of what we thought it should be. And this was a little bit early, a couple of days before it was due, and I got nervous. I called them and I said, by the way, we didn't really understand you. Did you seriously want us to give you a bid to build it? And they said, yes, in fact, your bid won't be accepted unless you do that. So we scrambled and put together a team of, we primed it with local projects, and including a contractor, an media equipment supplier, would you call it? AV integrator, and got the RFP back in. So here we go. And Jake and I both this is going to be a 10-minute conversation.
So the basic idea for the so this is the original information center as it used to exist in space, 53rd Street and 7th Avenue. And the space is going to look familiar to anyone who's been to information centers. I mean, typically they're a mixture of brochures and there's a large bank with counselors behind them. It sort of works like a doctor's office. You wait in line and you might be able to peruse some of the information they have, but basically you're just waiting and then they tell you something. And oftentimes they're repeating the same information over and over again. So it's really suboptimal on both sides. There's a lot of waiting, and tourists have a lot that they don't have a great amount of time to spend. And it's really boring for the counselors because they say the same things over and over again. So we did a couple things while we were deciding what to build. We surveyed the people who were working there and asked them, what are the top 100 questions? And they very easily found a consensus amongst themselves. Because basically people are looking for the top 90%, or 90% of the questions are the same things over and over and over again. Most people, yes, indeed, want to go to the Staten Island Ferry and the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building. Some of the larger challenges they had were just the quantity of different languages. Another big challenge was just to get people interested in really diverse new things. I mean, people are there because they understand the sort of top 10 landmarks. So we solved it with a bunch of different interfaces.
Okay, now I'm going to jump in. What's interesting, for all of you architects, you understand these extremely constrained storefront spaces. So that image you saw before, we basically understood that this is not really about this small space. It's really about the city. It's about all the things that Jake and local projects had to worry about, which is taking, from a graphic design and media design point of view, taking the city and pulling it in. So I'm going to get caught up to our slideshow here. But basically, we cleared out the space. And as Jake put it, we killed the brochure. We didn't totally kill the brochure. But what we did do was try to shift the paradigm in terms of what was possible, in terms of how you give out information, which means collaborating with the client to tell them that they didn't need to have people standing on counters anymore, that it was possible technically to, in fact, bring a mapping system in and have an object-based system where people could collect things like they do when they walk around the street, or like they do when they peruse brochures, collect them, make their own itineraries. And so you're looking at the space here when Jake, we finished the architecture and the integration, and Jake spent, what, about a month actually setting up, we probably wanted to talk about this, and actually testing it. So that, Mayor Bloomberg
came, he used, and I'll explain how these different interfaces work in just a second, but Mayor Bloomberg came, he cut the ribbon. They actually picked the most gargantuan staff member to stand next to him to demo the table. Very ill-fated choice, I think. But you can see, even with a quantity or density of brochures and information, it still has a relatively light, clean, very contemporary feeling. That's definitely what the client wanted. We had been involved in a previous iteration that was sort of torpedoed because it would have had to have included a lot of landmark, sort of neoclassical details. And George Fakita, the head of NYC & Co., is all about big, contemporary, modern, slick, simple. I think both in sort of look and feel and also in interaction, they were really looking for the Apple Store. They never quite said that to us. But essentially, and it's not really a coincidence that we actually came up essentially with a retail design solution for the information center.
Even though, interestingly enough, part of our pitch when we got the London competition was that this isn't a store experience. It's actually an experience where the space is, in a sense, and I skipped over the plan too fast, mapping the city for you and creating orientation devices where there is a simulation in the architectural design that is also within how you do the interface of the table. So Jake will show a video in a minute, but essentially what you do on the table is also what you do in this space, and you hope what you will then understand to do when you go out into the city. And so there's a kind of both striping pattern, but there's also a kind of larger space between these overheads, which has a projector, and the projector whereby you're kind of, through color, captured in whatever thing you're looking at. If you're looking at a restaurant, then it goes green, and you're in the green space. So subliminally, you kind of understand that within the thing you're choosing, that thing is also occupying the larger space of all restaurants in New York, or all museums. So it goes purple, and it's all museum, even though you've picked something specific. So there is, in this case, it is allowing the information to be more of a sensory experience.
So I'm going to go ahead and show, is this the video?
The video's next, yeah.
So I'm going to sort of go through this video and pause at moments. This is the space in action. Basically, there are a couple of different interfaces that apply to people who have different needs and interests at the time. There's tables that are much more exploratory. They really are meant to be a sort of large, spectacular piece of technology. It's not a coincidence that we literally got the largest screen that we could actually afford. We made this object-based tracking system for these UR dots. But it's really meant to sort of seduce people and draw them in Behind that, you have what we call the FAQ stations, and those answer the top 100 questions. And in the back, there's a large-scale interface that sort of ties the whole space together, both because it has slides of New York City as well as these flyers which have been shown. So within the FAQ stations, the big idea here is...
Frequently asked questions, by the way.
The big idea here is really, really fast access to information. And really, again, these are like the top 100 questions. The key here is that they are translated to 10 different languages, and you can email the information to yourself. So it's all about ease of use. It's about access. One of the classic problems of information centers is that the person who speaks Russian has their day off on the day when you're there. It's ADA accessible, but and it's also highly visual. You can see on the top, that's 1 in 7 steps of what we call visual direction. We basically send interns out to take photographs of how to get from that physical spot, 53rd and 7th, to all the different landmarks that people are getting directions to. So it's a picture of the actual subway station. Yes, here's a picture of the 1 train, take that downtown. Here's a picture, get out of this exit, walk upstairs, then you're at South Ferry, walk down this pathway, and then you're at the Statue of Liberty. So it's really trying to basically tap into just like simplicity of use, and that of course is the instantiation of the city's marketing efforts to make the city easier to use.
So I'm just going to talk about the kind of architecture of that. So none of this stuff existed. So from the architecture kind of merged into industrial design from our role. And it was a little bit, since this entire thing happened in 6 months and we were supposed to figure out how to pay for the whole thing, it was a little bit like fixing a car while it was running. So Jake was figuring all of this, and we had to figure out how big it was and how it was going to fit into everything, which, as you all know, is very hard to detail something when the size is changing all the time. So we ended up thinking that it was really important about halfway through the construction process that the brochures, in fact, had a role in the information. Because no matter how we tried, in the end, they weren't going to go away because portability, the idea of paper going away isn't really there yet. And so we wanted them to have an important role. So they ended up being, which you never see in these information centers, a single row that allowed you to read on the left-hand side, this was material the city did, and on the right-hand side, it was material that all of the member organizations did. So there was a kind of play. The FAQ went with the New York information, and then the other side kind of led you to the pylon.
So here's some emailing information. The way that the tables work, you pick up a physical UR here dot, you drop it on one of these 3 interactive tables. It basically opens up these different categories, and you peruse the database by literally moving the UR here dot around this giant map table. Essentially, the analysis was that New York City is a pedestrian city, it's a walking city, so the perimeter that's drawn around the UR here dot is literally signed by the number of minutes it takes to walk within that perimeter itself. You choose a category, brings up these different, all these different restaurants or attractions in this case. You choose them, you can open them, you can add them to your puck, and essentially what you're doing is curating a custom guidebook for the city itself. A lot of travel, those are Flickr photos. We're always grabbing the last 7 days of photos from Flickr of the city itself, which is kind of remarkable just to see what people are actually taking photographs of, and it's always very, very current. So, we had to... It's dangerous. We have a curatorial system, so you can get out any bad. But it is kind of amazing. Like, you'll read stuff in current events, and there it'll be on Flickr. Like, it's kind of self-obvious, but all the things that are happening in New York, people are taking photographs of them, and then they appear dynamically on the table. There's also a curated top 10 list, which is what you're seeing there. But the key, again, to this is both access to information. This is much more about seduction, but then about portability. So you can drop the same puck and get an instant printout. You can send it to your phone. You can email it to yourself. And then you can also take your custom guidebook. You drop it onto the pylon in the back, and it gives you a custom flyover of the city itself. One of the issues in New York City is that because so many people take the subway, it's actually quite disorienting. People can't contextualize the different stops one to the next. So the idea here was to contextualize all their choices within the city itself, and also sublimity to really push the idea of the 5 boundaries. You sort of start with the globe and fly into New York, which is its own sort of fabulous marketing message that, of course, of everything in the entire world, you're going to go to New York. But also within that context, we're always, within the flyover, highlighting all 5 boroughs. There's a lot of signage about the different boroughs themselves. And then obviously the information is there on your phone, or it's there in your email, it's there in your printout. NYC & Co is really smart about lots of different marketing tie-ins, so you can get coupons, all those things are sent to you. And obviously a lot of this is contingent on the client having so much incredible access to content, and being a very willing and active technological partner. We had people who didn't necessarily have a great budget for it, but had incredible taste and really found ways to make it work time and again.
And just to kind of jump in, that you have to understand that a lot of these ideas, we only really had 6 months to both, and the client, NYC Company, was actually evolving their website at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a huge stream of information and a lot of ways it could go. So some of the refinements of the design were actually done while this was under construction, and that included refining and defining these pylons, but also in the end, ending up, instead of a projection system, going with an LCD setup at the end. And again, the architecture kind of, we had a very strong framework, so I think that we were able to kind of go with, you know, how to kind of bend the rules a bit and kind of change around the space.
I had one observer looking at this piece yesterday, and he was like, so it looks like the technology is really integrated with the architecture. Like, how do you do that? I mean, he actually works for Bloomberg, and he was sort of incredulous that it's so sort of seamlessly integrated. And I think the key here is that it was a partnership from the beginning. I mean, it sounds like it was very similar to the case with the previous project. But in this case, all of the architecture was basically integrated with the interaction ideas from the beginning and vice versa. So Claire was alluding to our piece proposal, or submission, which had the interactive smart tables that were map-based. They were shaped like lima beams. They were distasteful to the client who was interested in something very straight and modern. But a lot of the essential ideas about the interaction were there from the beginning. We clarified it through a very quick but very rigorous architectural process. And then from then on out, it was all about how to basically hide the technology inside the architecture and express the architecture through the technology itself.
And there was a lot of kind of refinement that had to be done, ergonomic, I can never get that word, but anyways, basically, much of this had to be done so you were able to lean over, and then the rules, the ADA rules aren't quite there for when you have an FAQ screen and the interpretation of what that meant. So, the process of mocking up, since we, with 3D Lab, were responsible for the construction, meant that we actually had to mock up during construction and on site to make sure it worked. And this was specifically difficult with the tables. And you can see from here that the tool we used as architects was really forced perspective, because we felt that was for a very small budget and time. And these are kind of beautiful photographs from Paul Warshall. But the forced perspective gave us the chance to actually try and explode the space out into the street. It gave us what we needed to tell you where the front was and where the back was on the tables. It also gave us a chance to allude to the fact that the I is the international symbol for information. Yeah. And so really, both for media and architecture, we tended to just cross each other's boundaries. And we used, you know, glossy and matte paint where we could. And then I want to just show you the sequence of shots that Ken Toronto, photographer, did spontaneously the other day, just sitting there taking pictures of people kind of interacting with the space. So although I would say that it is constrained, it was a very constrained problem architecturally, it was a huge problem from a program point of view, because what we were trying to achieve was something without a site, or the site itself was New York City. The site, we wanted to get away from the site being this little typical commercial storefront on 52nd Street and 7th Avenue, and make the site equal to the city. And I think that for us, that was the reason we were willing to do such a crazy thing, and it was 6 and then became 9 months to integrate the website and everything in, was because it was a chance to really change the definition of this kind of building type of use.
It's interesting too, the response we've gotten. I mean, there's been a lot of response from architecture community, but like the design community's been kind of interested in the project. We got blogged by Kanye West, by the rapper, who's really interested in design, and the comments were hilarious. Like you get like these, you like the stripes. We've got a bunch of comments. Someone commented that 1980 road and they want their design back. So,
yeah, a lot of nasty stuff too. But I think this kind of, just this last sequence shows that really for all of us, the purpose of design was really that this is a project outside. It's very public. And we've got Willie Wong from NYC Company designed this poster, which is on a bunch of bus stations about the project. And I think it's really kind of reflective of the effect we hoped it would have when we started really from nothing and kind of aimed some amount of kind of design, information design, architectural design at it.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that, I mean, NYC is a marketing agency, so obviously they're very good at it. It's interesting that they're actually marketing the technology and the interface and the design literally as the information center itself. It's its own draw. Which plays in very well with their messaging about New York City itself.
And I guess it's to just say that it takes a lot, you know, it's amazing that a 2,000, that's generous, square foot project could take as many people as it did, both from our offices, all of our studio, many of them are here, and Jake's studio, as well as 3D Lab and GestureTech in Canada and Videosonic and NYC Company NYC Company had a huge team of people working on the kind of content side of this at the same time.
Right.
So,
and I think that, just to go back a couple, sorry. I think when you go back and actually look at the space itself, it is kind of incredible how much the architecture underscores the interaction and vice versa. I mean, it is truly, and this was actually straight out of the RFP, they were looking for an information space. And it really works quite effectively as that. It's not a sort of cluttered space, it's very clean, it's very it really self-identifies very well, so people sort of flow in and they're drawn to the different things that catch their eye. And it's really well staffed, which is another key to making particularly really ambitious interfaces work seamlessly, is that there are people there to explain it to you if you're challenged in a variety of different ways. So
I just want to say a little bit about kind of the fluidity of the design. This was a little bit like it was being designed on site while it was under construction too. But one thing that's really interesting is that about almost at the end, like I think it was basically finished, they decided they were going to put that we could, or that the MTA would agree to put a MetroCard machine back in space. There was a MetroCard machine. The reason it was important is because there's a lot of inaccessible subways still, and people who are in wheelchairs need to buy MetroCards and then go into the subways. So in trying to figure out how, and printers, we had printers in that. So I had to figure out how to add the MetroCard machine, which are incredibly heavy, and by the way, require large safes and all these things you would never believe, just putting something in the wall. It's probably the nicest installation of a MetroCard machine in the city, so you'll have to buy your MetroCards there. But I think that it wasn't done for a huge amount of money, but I would say that, and it didn't have a very complex set of design kind of moves, very few moves, but at the same time, it was impossible to render because it's spatially very complex. And I would say the reason we've shown so many photographs here and not really renderings is all of our renderings were completely unsuccessful. And the only thing we got out of them was essentially the idea that we would have no exposed light fixtures, so that in fact it had a level of abstraction that allowed the media to really show. That's all we got out of the rendering. So I think it's for me it was an interesting lesson in an age where renderings seemed to be king, that they were useless in the case of this project.
I'll also say, just in closing, I mean, it's fun to have an information center that's actually fun to send people to. Meaning that idea that you would that you make an information center that's not standard, but that challenges people, that's interesting, that it has its own novelty factor, even as it's solving these tough design problems in innovative ways. It's also just great to send people to. And they've had a lot of really good response where people are starting to go to the information center just as its own draw. You get a lot of technology technology people, design people. It was highlighted in the ICFF, things to do in Midtown. It was like the key photograph. And it is a sort of rarity to find this level of design in this neighborhood, so it's really, it's an added boon in that way as well.
What are the hours for those of us who want to visit?
They're what, 8 in the morning